What happens when someone who built their life by breaking limits finally meets one they cannot bypass? In a world where innovation moves faster than caution, one bold decision would quietly disrupt an entire system. Not because it failed, but because it worked too soon. He believed progress justified disruption. The city believed stability mattered more. And inside a silent courtroom, a simple question would begin to change everything. Who really pays the price of progress? This is the story of a visionary who thought the future couldn't wait, until the present pushed back. The first thing Leonard Voss noticed when he stepped into the municipal courtroom was how small it felt. Not physically small, but socially. It lacked the grandeur of boardrooms he had grown accustomed to. There were no polished marble floors stretching into infinity, no assistants whispering updates, no silent deference that followed him wherever he went. Instead, there were wooden benches worn smooth by years of ordinary use, faded wall paint, and a quietness that felt unimportant. Leonard adjusted his cufflinks as though he were entering a private meeting rather than a legal proceeding. His suit was tailored in Milan. His watch was limited edition. His shoes had never touched a surface that wasn't carefully maintained. He carried himself with the same confidence that had opened doors across continents. The confidence of someone whose last name had always done the speaking, long before he ever needed to. To Leonard, this wasn't a trial. It was an inconvenience. 6 nights earlier, he had taken his imported performance car through a residential district just after midnight. The roads were empty. The city slept. At least, that was how Leonard remembered it. The speed had felt liberating, the kind of rush that made the world blur into irrelevance. Streetlights streaked past like distant stars. The roar of the engine drowned out everything else. To him, it was harmless. To others, it had been terrifying. Neighbors had reported the deafening noise. A cyclist had been forced off the road. Security cameras captured the vehicle accelerating through intersections with reckless disregard. But Leonard didn't see it that way. He saw it as a moment, a brief escape, nothing more. When he was summoned to appear before the court, he hadn't even bothered to read the full details. His legal representation had assured him that these matters rarely developed into anything serious. There would likely be a fine, possibly a warning. Then it would disappear, like most inconveniences tended to. So Leonard entered the courtroom with visible amusement. He took his seat with the relaxed posture of someone attending a routine appointment. His expression held no concern, only mild curiosity. The proceedings began. The charges were read in calm, measured tones. Leonard listened politely, though his gaze occasionally wandered. He seemed more interested in the architectural simplicity of the ceiling than the implications of the words being spoken. When asked if he understood the nature of the hearing, he responded smoothly, "Yes." When asked if he had anything to add, he offered a faint smile. "I believe this is being treated with more severity than necessary." The room remained quiet. Leonard continued. There was no intent to cause disruption. The streets were empty. No one was harmed. His tone was composed, not defiant but dismissive. It was the tone of someone accustomed to reframing situations rather than confronting them. He did not apologize. He did not express regret. Instead, he described the event as an overreaction. The judge presiding over the matter did not interrupt. There was no raised voice, no visible frustration, only attentive listening. Leonard interpreted the silence as agreement. Encouraged, he added, "In my experience, matters like this are resolved proportionately." The implication was subtle. Resolution meant efficiency. Efficiency meant closure. And closure meant departure. Observers in the courtroom shifted slightly. The tension was not loud. It did not arrive with confrontation. It grew quietly, like a pressure no one could quite define. Leonard remained unaware of it. When witness statements were summarized, detailing the disruption caused and the potential risks involved, Leonard's response remained consistent. He acknowledged the reports, but minimized their significance. It was a brief incident. I maintained full control. It did not result in lasting harm. Each statement was delivered with polished calm, yet beneath the words lay a message. This was not worthy of consequence. The judge continued to listen. Not once did he rush, not once did he react. The absence of reaction unsettled even Leonard's own counsel, who began to sense a shift. But Leonard did not. To him, the process appeared predictable. He expected the usual progression: clarification, minor penalty, conclusion. As the discussion continued, Leonard leaned slightly forward and added one final observation. "My schedule is demanding. I would appreciate an efficient resolution." The words were polite, yet unmistakable. Time, to Leonard, was a resource too valuable to be spent here. The courtroom grew still. For the first time, the judge spoke at length. His voice was calm, measured, unhurried. He acknowledged Leonard's perspective. He noted the absence of physical injury. He recognized the importance of proportion. Leonard relaxed. This sounded familiar. Then the judge paused and delivered a ruling Leonard had not anticipated. Instead of imposing a traditional fine or issuing a standard warning, the court assigned Leonard a direct role in addressing the impact of his actions. He was to fund and oversee a public safety rehabilitation initiative in the very neighborhood affected by his driving, not as a distant contributor, but as an active participant. He would collaborate with community representatives, engage with safety planners, support measurable improvements in pedestrian protection, and return to the court within 6 months to present documented progress. The ruling was precise, unavoidable, and personal. The courtroom fell silent. Leonard blinked. The words had not registered immediately. This was not punishment in the conventional sense. No number had been attached. No transaction could resolve it. This required presence, visibility, engagement. For the first time, Leonard felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his composure. Not fear, but exposure. Money could settle accounts. Influence could redirect outcomes. But neither could create distance from participation. The judge concluded simply, "This matter is not about cost. It is about responsibility." Leonard sat motionless. The courtroom, once insignificant, now felt different. Not larger, but unavoidable. As the proceedings adjourned, Leonard remained seated for a moment longer than necessary. For the first time in his life, he recognized a boundary his name could not cross. Influence could open doors, but it could not close this one. And in that quiet realization, Leonard understood something he had never considered before. Consequence was not always something that could be paid. Sometimes it had to be lived. The cameras were not allowed inside the courtroom. For the first time in years, Isabella Cade entered a space where her presence did not guarantee admiration. There were no flashing lights, no curated angles, no applause waiting just beyond the entrance. Only silence. The same silence that had once intimidated aspiring designers now greeted her without ceremony. Isabella moved with the same precision that had built her empire, every step deliberate, posture perfect, expression composed. Her attire was understated but unmistakably refined, crafted from her own label's latest private collection. She did not look like someone summoned. She looked like someone attending by choice. Behind her followed a small team of advisors, each maintaining respectful distance. Yet even their presence could not replicate the influence Isabella commanded in every other environment she entered. Here,
the balance was different. Months earlier, Isabella had hosted a grand promotional showcase inside a historic public building, a landmark known for its architectural heritage and cultural significance. The event had been hailed as revolutionary. Temporary installations transformed the interior into a living work of art. Elevated platforms reimagined space. Lighting structures reshaped the building's atmosphere. Guests described it as breathtaking. Critics called it daring. But what many didn't know, at least not immediately, was that some of those transformations had required structural alterations that were never formally approved. Support beams had been adjusted. Anchoring systems had been modified. Load distributions had shifted. To Isabella, these were creative necessities. To preservation experts, they were risks. When the modifications were later reviewed, concerns emerged about long-term stability and integrity. That was how Isabella found herself here. Not because the event had failed, but because it had succeeded too boldly. As proceedings began, Isabella remained calm. She listened as the incident was summarized. Her response, when invited, was measured. These decisions were made to enhance public engagement, she explained. The intention was to breathe life into a space that had grown dormant.
She did not deny the alterations. She reframed them. They were creative decisions, she added. Her voice carried confidence, not defiance. She spoke of vision, of transformation, of cultural relevance. The presiding judge listened without interruption. Isabella continued. The event brought global attention to a structure that had long been overlooked. Its value was amplified. The words were persuasive. She emphasized outcomes. Tourism had increased. Interest had surged. Conversations had begun. Her tone suggested that the building had benefited more than it had been burdened. She did not apologize. Instead, she questioned the rigidity of existing processes. Innovation rarely fits neatly within established boundaries. The room remained quiet. As witness accounts were presented, the narrative shifted. Preservation specialists described the challenges introduced by the changes. Structural engineers outlined how even temporary adjustments could have lasting implications. Community representatives spoke of the building's significance beyond aesthetic value. Each perspective added weight. Still, Isabella's composure did not falter. She acknowledged the perspectives but maintained her stance. The purpose was enhancement, she reiterated. Economic contributions were cited. Cultural impact was emphasized. Public enthusiasm was referenced. But responsibility remained absent. The imbalance became evident. Observers sensed it, not through confrontation, but through omission. When the court inquired whether she believed formal authorization was necessary prior to alteration, Isabella paused briefly. In retrospect, she said, greater consultation may have enriched the process. It was not an admission. It was a refinement. Her confidence suggested that the matter would conclude in a familiar way. Restitution, perhaps funding, an agreement, then closure. Instead, the judge spoke with calm deliberation. Acknowledging the event's impact, he noted the distinction between creation and preservation. He spoke of stewardship, the responsibility shared by those who interact with public spaces. Then came the directive. Rather than imposing fines or requiring monetary restitution, Isabella was instructed to collaborate directly with preservation specialists to restore the affected site, not as a sponsor, but as an active participant. She was to engage in planning, attend consultations, support implementation. Additionally, she was to establish an educational initiative promoting responsible urban development within creative industries, encouraging future projects to balance innovation with respect for shared heritage. Her involvement was not optional, nor was it symbolic. It would be public, ongoing, and visible. The ruling transformed the nature of the matter. This was no longer about compliance. It was about stewardship. The courtroom fell still. Isabella remained composed, but the shift was unmistakable. Financial settlement would have been straightforward. Engagement was different. This required presence, dialogue, partnership. Her influence could support the process, but it could not replace it. As proceedings concluded, Isabella sat quietly for a moment. For years, she had defined legacy through creation, through disruption, through vision realized. Now, she faced an unfamiliar dimension. Respect, not as admiration, but as responsibility. As she rose to leave, the realization settled, subtle yet undeniable. Legacy was not shaped solely by what one built, but by how one protected what already existed. And for the first time, Isabella understood that creation without respect risked becoming erasure. The path forward would demand more than innovation. It would demand care. The courtroom was quieter than Adrian Hale expected. He had imagined resistance, debate, perhaps even confrontation. But instead, the atmosphere felt measured, almost reflective. Adrian stepped forward with the calm focus that had defined his career. He was not dressed to impress. No dramatic tailoring. No calculated visual statement. Only simplicity. He carried himself like someone accustomed to navigating complexity rather than ceremony. For Adrian, this wasn't a crisis. It was a misunderstanding. Months earlier, his company had deployed a network of experimental autonomous coordination units within a public infrastructure zone, an advanced system designed to optimize traffic flow, emergency routing, and energy distribution in real time. The deployment had been ambitious, efficient, and, in Adrian's view, necessary. The future did not wait for permission. Progress demanded movement. But the deployment had triggered an unforeseen cascade, a protective shutdown initiated by municipal safeguards when the system began operating beyond its authorized scope. For nearly 3 hours, essential services were disrupted. Traffic signals froze. Transit scheduling faltered. Emergency routing slowed. Backup systems eventually restored functionality, but the interruption had left an impression. To Adrian, the shutdown was evidence of outdated safeguards struggling to accommodate advancement. To others, it was evidence of risk introduced without consent. And so he stood here now, summoned before a regulatory court. As the proceedings began, Adrian listened to the summary of events without objection. He did not contest the facts. He did not deny the deployment. Instead, when invited to respond, he spoke with clarity. This was a necessary step, he explained. His voice carried conviction, not arrogance, but certainty. Progress often involves temporary friction. He described the system's projected capabilities: reduced congestion, faster emergency response, improved energy efficiency. He framed the shutdown not as failure, but as transition. A temporary inconvenience, he said, on the path toward long-term benefit. There was no apology, only rationale. Adrian's reputation had been built on challenging limits, on accelerating timelines, on refusing to let caution stall possibility. To him, innovation was not disruption for its own sake. It was advancement. The presiding judge listened attentively. Adrian continued, outlining models and projections. Data supported his claims. Simulations demonstrated potential improvements. Future integrations promised resilience. He spoke of scalability, of adaptability, of the necessity to test systems within real environments rather than theoretical confines. The room remained still. When public impact statements were presented, the narrative shifted. Community representatives described delays that had affected daily routines. Transit coordinators outlined logistical confusion. Emergency service officials
noted increased strain during the interruption. The disruption had not been catastrophic, but it had been tangible. Adrian acknowledged the experiences, yet maintained his perspective. "Progress requires tolerance," he said. He emphasized that every transformative system in history had encountered resistance. Every advancement had required adjustment. The tension that followed was not rooted in anger. It emerged from difference, a philosophical divide. Innovation versus responsibility. Momentum versus caution. Adrian spoke confidently of the future, of what the system could become, of how the temporary disruption would ultimately yield enduring benefit. But the judge's questions focused elsewhere. Not on potential, on impact. Not on projections, on experience. "Who bears the burden of transition?" he asked quietly. Adrian paused. The question was unfamiliar. In his world, transition was an accepted cost, an inevitable phase. Yet here, it was framed differently, as something lived, not calculated. The courtroom waited. Adrian responded carefully. "Adaptation is part of progress." The judge nodded, acknowledging the logic, but not concluding. As proceedings continued, it became clear that this was not a debate over technology. It was a discussion about relationship, between innovation and those affected by it, between vision and lived reality. When the time came for resolution, Adrian anticipated regulatory restriction, perhaps oversight, possibly delay. Instead, the judge delivered an unexpected outcome. Adrian was instructed to establish a public transparency platform documenting real-time impact assessments of any future experimental deployments, not as internal reporting, but as shared visibility. The platform would provide accessible updates, operational status, impact forecasts, and community feedback channels. Additionally, Adrian was required to engage directly with affected communities before implementing new experimental systems. Dialogue would precede deployment. Understanding would accompany innovation. The directive was precise. His company was to operate not only with technical excellence, but with social visibility. The ruling reframed the challenge. Adrian was no longer measured solely by what he built, but by how he integrated it. The courtroom remained silent as the implications settled. This was not limitation. It was expectation. Not restriction, but connection. Adrian sat still for a moment. The directive did not halt progress. It reshaped it. For years, he had pursued acceleration, optimization, efficiency. Now he faced a new dimension: inclusion. Progress, he realized, did not unfold in isolation. It moved through communities, through systems, through lives.
As the proceedings concluded, Adrian understood something he had not fully considered before. Advancement without dialogue invited resistance. Innovation without understanding created distance. And progress without inclusion risked becoming opposition. For the first time, Adrian recognized that the future he sought to build would not succeed through speed alone. It would require alignment. Because progress, he now saw, was not only about moving forward, it was about moving together.